Question 1. Performance analysis shows that a proposed industrial expansion project may have significant, but not fully understood, impacts on local water quality and biodiversity. The project proponent is eager to proceed quickly and suggests focusing only on the most obvious potential impacts to expedite the environmental review process. As the certified environmental compliance manager, which approach best ensures compliance with environmental regulations and ethical practice? Option A. Focus the EIA solely on water quality impacts, as these are generally considered more critical than biodiversity impacts, and defer any biodiversity considerations to a later operational phase. Option B. Rely on the project proponent's preliminary assessment, which identifies only the most direct and easily quantifiable impacts, and proceed with the environmental review based on this limited information. Option C. Utilize generic impact assessment methodologies without tailoring them to the specific characteristics of the project and its local environment, assuming that standard mitigation measures will suffice. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment, IA, that thoroughly investigates all potential impacts on water quality and biodiversity, including indirect and cumulative effects, and proposes detailed mitigation and monitoring plans, even if it requires additional time and resources. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment, IA, that thoroughly investigates all potential impacts on water quality and biodiversity, including indirect and cumulative effects, and proposes detailed mitigation and monitoring plans, even if it requires additional time and resources. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a certified environmental compliance manager to interpret and apply complex environmental impact assessment, IA, regulations to a novel situation. The challenge lies in balancing the need for thorough environmental protection with the practicalities of project development and regulatory timelines. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the chosen approach aligns with the spirit and letter of the law, avoids unnecessary delays, and upholds ethical standards. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive and legally compliant EIA process. This involves identifying all potential environmental impacts, assessing their significance, and proposing appropriate mitigation measures. Adhering to the established EIA framework ensures that all stakeholders are informed, that potential harm is minimized, and that the project proceeds with a clear understanding of its environmental footprint. This aligns with the core principles of environmental stewardship and regulatory compliance mandated by environmental laws. An incorrect approach that bypasses or inadequately addresses key EIA stages would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. For instance, omitting a crucial impact assessment phase could lead to unforeseen environmental damage, violating specific provisions of environmental protection acts. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the public interest in environmental health. Another incorrect approach might involve relying solely on historical data without considering project-specific changes, which could result in an incomplete or inaccurate assessment, thereby failing to meet the requirements for a current and relevant EIA. This would be a failure to comply with the best available science, or current knowledge principles often embedded in EIA legislation. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process when faced with EIA challenges. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the specific regulatory requirements for EIA in the relevant jurisdiction. 2. Identifying all potential environmental aspects and impacts associated with the proposed project. 3. Evaluating the significance of these impacts based on established criteria and scientific understanding. 4. Developing robust mitigation and monitoring plans. 5. Consulting with relevant authorities and stakeholders. 6. Documenting the entire process meticulously to ensure transparency and accountability. Question 2. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of potential environmental impacts. A manufacturing company is proposing a significant expansion of its facility, which will involve installing new process equipment and increasing production throughput. The company's environmental manager is tasked with determining if this expansion will trigger a Prevention of Significant Deterioration (PSD) permit under the Clean Air Act. What is the most appropriate initial step to take in this assessment? Option A. Conduct a detailed engineering analysis of the new equipment and proposed operational changes to accurately calculate the potential to emit T for all regulated pollutants, and then compare these PTEs to the significant emission rates, SIR, defined in the regulations. Option B. Assume the expansion will not trigger PSD review unless explicitly informed by the regulatory agency, given the company's history of good compliance. Option C. Begin the process of designing and implementing pollution control technologies for the new equipment, assuming a PSD permit will be required to expedite the project timeline. Option D. Focus solely on criteria pollutants that are typically associated with major sources, as these are the most likely to trigger PSD review. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed engineering analysis of the new equipment and proposed operational changes to accurately calculate the potential to emit T for all regulated pollutants, and then compare these PTEs to the significant emission rates, SIR, defined in the regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in environmental compliance, balancing industrial development with the mandate to protect air quality under the Prevention of Significant Deterioration (PSD) program. The core difficulty lies in accurately assessing potential emissions from a new or modified source and determining if it triggers PSD review, which involves stringent permitting requirements and potentially the application of best available control technology, BACT. A misjudgment can lead to significant regulatory penalties, project delays, and reputational damage. The correct approach involves a thorough, proactive, and technically sound assessment of potential emissions. This includes a detailed review of the proposed project's design, operational parameters, and potential for fugitive emissions. It necessitates engaging with regulatory agencies early in the planning process to understand specific requirements and expectations. This proactive engagement and rigorous technical evaluation represent best professional practice because they align directly with the goals of the Clean Air Act's PSD provisions. To ensure that air quality in areas that already meet national ambient air quality standards does not deteriorate. Adhering to these principles demonstrates a commitment to compliance and responsible environmental stewardship. An incorrect approach would be to underestimate or ignore potential emissions, particularly those that might be considered minor or fugitive, without proper analysis. This could involve relying on outdated emission factors or making assumptions that are not technically defensible. Such an approach fails to meet the regulatory obligation to accurately assess potential to emit T and can lead to a failure to obtain a necessary PSD permit. Ethically, it represents a disregard for the public interest in maintaining air quality. Another incorrect approach might be to delay engagement with the regulatory agency until the project is nearly complete, hoping to grandfather, or avoid scrutiny. This is a failure of professional judgment and can be seen as an attempt to circumvent regulatory requirements, leading to potential enforcement actions and loss of trust. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the specific applicability thresholds for PSD review under the relevant regulations. This involves calculating the PTE for all regulated pollutants. If the PTE for any pollutant exceeds the significant emission rate, a PSD permit is required. The decision-making process should then involve a detailed technical analysis of control technologies, considering both cost and effectiveness in achieving the lowest achievable emission rate, LAIR, or BACT, as applicable. Early and transparent communication with the permitting authority is crucial to navigate the process efficiently and effectively, ensuring all regulatory requirements are met and the project proceeds on a compliant and sustainable path. Question 3. Analysis of how a certified environmental compliance manager should approach the integration of the Paris Agreement's objectives into their organization's operational compliance strategy, considering the need to align with national regulatory frameworks. Option A. Develop a comprehensive emissions reduction plan that directly addresses the organization's greenhouse gas footprint, ensuring alignment with national targets and reporting requirements derived from the country's nationally determined contributions, NDC, under the Paris Agreement. Option B. Interpret the Paris Agreement as a purely diplomatic agreement, disregarding its influence on domestic environmental laws and corporate compliance obligations. Option C. Prioritize immediate cost-saving measures by deferring investments in emission reduction technologies, assuming that the long-term implications of the Paris Agreement are uncertain and will not significantly impact current operations. Option D. Focus primarily on voluntary corporate social responsibility initiatives related to climate change, as the Paris Agreement is an international accord with no direct mandatory enforcement at the corporate level. The correct answer is A. Develop a comprehensive emissions reduction plan that directly addresses the organization's greenhouse gas footprint, ensuring alignment with national targets and reporting requirements derived from the country's nationally determined contributions, NDC, under the Paris Agreement. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified environmental compliance manager to navigate the complexities of international climate agreements and their practical implementation within a specific national regulatory context. The challenge lies in balancing the overarching goals of the Paris Agreement with the immediate operational realities and legal obligations of the organization. The manager must interpret how broad international commitments translate into actionable compliance strategies, considering potential conflicts between national policies and international aspirations, and the need to demonstrate tangible progress to stakeholders. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the organization's current greenhouse gas (GHG) emissions profile, identification of relevant national legislation and policies that implement the Paris Agreement's objectives, such as nationally determined contributions (NDCs), and the development of a strategic plan to reduce emissions in alignment with these national targets. This approach represents best professional practice because it is grounded in verifiable data, legal compliance, and proactive environmental stewardship. It directly addresses the core mandate of the Certified Environmental Compliance Manager by ensuring that the organization's actions are both legally sound and environmentally responsible, contributing to both national and international climate goals. This systematic process allows for the identification of emission reduction opportunities, the allocation of resources, and the establishment of performance metrics, fostering a culture of continuous improvement in environmental performance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely focus on voluntary corporate social responsibility, CSR, initiatives without a clear link to national regulatory requirements derived from the Paris Agreement. This fails because, while voluntary actions are commendable, they do not guarantee legal compliance. If national laws mandate specific emission reduction targets or reporting mechanisms as part of the country's NDC, a purely voluntary approach could leave the organization non-compliant, leading to potential fines, reputational damage, and legal liabilities. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize short-term cost savings by delaying or ignoring investments in emission reduction technologies, assuming that the Paris Agreement's impact is distant or uncertain. This is professionally unacceptable because it demonstrates a lack of foresight and a failure to proactively manage environmental risks. Climate change regulations are evolving, and delaying action can lead to higher future compliance costs, missed opportunities for innovation, and increased exposure to climate-related physical and transitional risks. It also undermines the ethical responsibility of the compliance manager to protect the environment and ensure long-term business sustainability. A third incorrect approach would be to interpret the Paris Agreement as solely an international diplomatic framework with no direct bearing on domestic operational compliance. This is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. The Paris Agreement's strength lies in its framework for countries to set and achieve their own NDCs, which are then translated into national laws and regulations. Compliance manager must understand and adhere to these national implementations, not dismiss the international agreement as irrelevant to their daily duties. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the legal and regulatory landscape. This involves identifying all applicable national laws, regulations, and policies that stem from international commitments like the Paris Agreement. Next, conduct a comprehensive environmental audit to establish a baseline of current performance, particularly GHG emissions. Following this, develop a strategic plan that integrates compliance requirements with operational capabilities and business objectives. This plan should include measurable targets, timelines, resource allocation, and a system for monitoring, reporting, and verification. MRV. Regular review and adaptation of the plan based on evolving regulations and performance data are crucial. This systematic, data-driven, and legally informed approach ensures robust environmental compliance and contributes to broader sustainability goals. Question 4. The audit findings indicate a potential release of a regulated substance into a local waterway, which has been observed and reported by local park maintenance staff. While the local health department has been informally notified and has indicated no immediate public health threat, the compliance manager is aware that state environmental regulations may require a more formal reporting and remediation process. Which of the following actions best represents the most appropriate and compliant response to this situation? Option A. Consult with the local health department to understand their assessment and then proceed solely based on their recommendations, without independently verifying state regulatory requirements. Option B. Rely on the local health department's informal assurance that there is no immediate public health threat and take no further action regarding state-level reporting or remediation. Option C. Delay reporting the release to any agency until a formal notice of violation is received from the local health department, assuming they will escalate if necessary. Option D. Immediately contact the state environmental agency to report the observed release, inquire about specific reporting and remediation requirements under state law, and provide all relevant audit findings. The correct answer is D. Immediately contact the state environmental agency to report the observed release, inquire about specific reporting and remediation requirements under state law, and provide all relevant audit findings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential violation of state environmental regulations that has been identified at the local level. The compliance manager must navigate the complexities of differing enforcement priorities and potential jurisdictional overlaps between state and local agencies. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the severity of the violation, understanding the specific reporting and remediation requirements under the relevant state laws, and determining the appropriate course of action to ensure compliance and avoid penalties, all while managing the relationship with the local enforcement body. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing direct engagement with the state environmental agency. This is because state environmental agencies are typically the primary regulatory bodies responsible for enforcing state-level environmental laws and regulations. They possess the ultimate authority and expertise in interpreting and applying these laws. By directly informing the state agency, the compliance manager ensures that the violation is addressed through the proper channels, that the state-specific remediation and reporting requirements are met, and that the company is acting proactively and transparently with the primary enforcement authority. This approach aligns with ethical obligations to comply with all applicable laws and regulations, and to report significant environmental issues promptly. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely relying on the local health department's guidance without consulting the state environmental agency. This is a regulatory failure because local health departments, while important for public health, may not have the full authority or expertise to interpret and enforce complex state environmental statutes. Their guidance might be incomplete or misaligned with state requirements, leading to non-compliance and potential penalties from the state. Ethically, it represents a failure to engage with the primary regulatory authority. Another incorrect approach is to delay reporting the issue to any agency until a formal notice of violation is received from the local health department. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Environmental laws often mandate prompt reporting of certain releases or violations. Delaying reporting can be considered a violation in itself, leading to increased penalties and demonstrating a lack of proactive environmental stewardship. It also undermines the principle of transparency with regulatory bodies. A third incorrect approach is to assume the local health department's informal assurance of no further action negates any state-level responsibility. This is a critical misjudgment of regulatory authority. Local assurances do not supersede state environmental laws or the enforcement powers of the state environmental agency. Relying solely on such informal assurances is a direct violation of the duty to comply with state regulations and can lead to severe consequences when the state agency eventually discovers the violation. Professional reasoning. In situations involving potential environmental violations, a compliance manager should follow a structured decision-making process. First, identify the specific environmental media or activity involved and the potential state and local regulations that might apply. Second, assess the severity and nature of the potential violation based on available audit findings. Third, consult the relevant state environmental agencies' regulations and guidance documents to understand reporting thresholds, remediation requirements, and enforcement procedures. Fourth, proactively communicate with the state environmental agency, providing accurate information and seeking clarification on compliance obligations. If local agencies are involved, understand their role and coordinate communication with the state agency as necessary. Document all communications and actions taken. This systematic approach ensures compliance, minimizes risk, and upholds professional ethical standards. Question 5. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a proposed commercial development project offers significant economic advantages to the local community, but it will inevitably involve filling a portion of a jurisdictional wetland. As the certified environmental compliance manager, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Section 404 of the Clean Water Act? Option A. Conduct a thorough site assessment to identify all practicable alternatives that would avoid or minimize wetland impacts, and consult with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and U.S. Environmental Protection Agency regarding the project's feasibility and potential permitting requirements. Option B. Prioritize the economic benefits by seeking to expedite the permitting process through a simplified application, arguing that the wetland area is of low ecological value and the development is crucial for job creation. Option C. Immediately begin the permitting process, focusing on the mitigation plan to compensate for the wetland fill, as the economic benefits are substantial and the mitigation will offset the impact. Option D. Proceed with the development as planned, assuming that any environmental concerns can be addressed through a general permit and that the economic benefits will outweigh any minor environmental consequences. The correct answer is C. Immediately begin the permitting process, focusing on the mitigation plan to compensate for the wetland fill, as the economic benefits are substantial and the mitigation will offset the impact. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge for environmental compliance managers, balancing economic development with environmental protection under the Clean Water Act Section 404 program. The core difficulty lies in interpreting and applying complex wetland regulations to a specific project, especially when the economic benefits appear substantial and the environmental impacts, while present, might seem manageable on the surface. The manager must navigate the permitting process, understand the nuances of waters of the United States, and assess the feasibility of mitigation or avoidance strategies. Professional judgment is paramount to ensure compliance and avoid significant legal and environmental repercussions. The correct approach involves a thorough, science-based assessment of the proposed project's potential impacts on wetlands, followed by a diligent exploration of all avoidance and minimization options before considering mitigation. This aligns with the fundamental principles of the Clean Water Act, which prioritizes avoiding wetland impacts. Best professional practice dictates a proactive engagement with regulatory agencies, e.g., the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, to understand their interpretation of the regulations and to ensure the project design reflects a genuine effort to minimize environmental harm. This approach demonstrates ethical responsibility and a commitment to regulatory compliance, safeguarding both the environment and the company from potential penalties. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the cost-benefit analysis to justify proceeding with the project as proposed, without adequately investigating avoidance or minimization. This fails to uphold the avoid, minimize, mitigate hierarchy mandated by Section 404. Ethically, it prioritizes financial gain over environmental stewardship. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that any wetland impact can be fully compensated for through mitigation, without first demonstrating that avoidance and minimization are not practicable. This misunderstands the regulatory intent and can lead to inadequate environmental protection. Furthermore, attempting to downplay or misrepresent the extent of wetland impacts to expedite the permitting process is a clear regulatory and ethical failure, potentially leading to enforcement actions and reputational damage. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the specific jurisdictional waters and wetlands present, consulting relevant guidance documents and regulations, and engaging in early and open communication with regulatory agencies. A systematic evaluation of project alternatives that avoid or minimize wetland impacts should be conducted. Only after these steps are exhausted should mitigation be considered as a last resort, and even then, it must be ecologically sound and compensatory. Question 6. Research into the integration of a newly acquired manufacturing plant into an existing environmental management system, EMS, reveals that the plant operates with distinct processes and chemical inputs. To ensure continued environmental compliance and effective risk management, which of the following approaches is most critical for the certified environmental compliance manager to adopt? Option A. Prioritize cost-saving measures by implementing only the most essential environmental controls for the new plant, assuming minimal deviation from current EMS requirements. Option B. Update the existing EMS documentation to broadly reference the new plant's operations and rely on general industry best practices for environmental control. Option C. Focus on updating existing operational procedures and training materials without a dedicated assessment of the new plant's unique environmental risks. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive environmental risk assessment specifically for the new plant's operations, identifying all new environmental aspects and impacts, and then integrate these findings into the existing EMS framework. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive environmental risk assessment specifically for the new plant's operations, identifying all new environmental aspects and impacts, and then integrate these findings into the existing EMS framework. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a new facility's environmental impact assessment, IA, is being integrated into an existing environmental management system, EMS. The core difficulty lies in ensuring the EMS effectively addresses the unique risks and compliance obligations of the new operation without compromising the integrity or efficiency of the established system. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for comprehensive risk coverage with the practicalities of system integration and resource allocation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and thorough identification of all potential environmental aspects and impacts associated with the new facility. This aligns with the fundamental principles of ISO 14001, which mandates that an EMS must consider all environmental aspects, including those arising from new activities. By conducting a detailed risk assessment specifically for the new facility, and then integrating these findings into the existing EMS, the organization ensures that all relevant legal requirements, operational controls, and emergency preparedness measures are addressed. This proactive and integrated strategy minimizes the likelihood of non-compliance, environmental incidents, and reputational damage, thereby demonstrating a commitment to responsible environmental stewardship. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on updating existing procedures without a specific assessment of the new facility's unique risks fails to acknowledge that new operations may introduce novel hazards or significantly alter existing ones. This could lead to regulatory noncompliance if specific permits, emission limits, or waste management protocols for the new facility are overlooked. Ethically, it represents a failure to adequately protect the environment by not fully understanding and mitigating the potential harm. Another incorrect approach that relies on general industry best practices without a site-specific risk assessment is also professionally unacceptable. While general practices are valuable, they may not adequately address the specific geological, meteorological, or operational conditions of the new facility, potentially leaving critical risks unmanaged. This could result in regulatory violations and environmental harm due to a lack of tailored controls. A further incorrect approach that prioritizes cost savings over a comprehensive risk assessment is ethically and regulatorily flawed. Environmental compliance is not merely a cost center but a fundamental responsibility. Prioritizing cost over thorough risk identification and mitigation can lead to significant future liabilities, including fines, remediation costs, and legal action, far exceeding any initial savings. It also demonstrates a disregard for the organization's environmental obligations and the well-being of the surrounding community. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the new facility. This should be followed by a detailed, systematic risk assessment process that identifies all potential environmental aspects and their associated impacts. The findings of this assessment must then be rigorously integrated into the existing EMS, ensuring that objectives, targets, operational controls, monitoring, and emergency response plans are updated accordingly. Regular review and auditing of the integrated system are crucial to confirm its effectiveness. Question 7. The control framework reveals that a manufacturing company, EcoSolutions Inc., is in the process of establishing its environmental management system, EMS. The company operates a primary manufacturing facility and has recently acquired a smaller, adjacent research and development laboratory. The EMS scope needs to be formally defined. Which of the following approaches to defining the EMS scope best aligns with regulatory expectations and best professional practice for environmental compliance? Option A. Define the EMS scope to encompass the primary manufacturing facility only, as it represents the majority of the company's environmental footprint, and the R&D lab's activities are considered minor. Option B. Define the EMS scope to include the primary manufacturing facility and the newly acquired research and development laboratory, ensuring a comprehensive assessment of all environmental aspects and impacts associated with both operations, and documenting the rationale for inclusion. Option C. Define the EMS scope to include the primary manufacturing facility and the R&D laboratory, but exclude any future planned expansions or potential new regulatory requirements not currently in effect. Option D. Define the EMS scope to cover only those activities explicitly mentioned in the company's environmental policy, excluding any operations or aspects not directly referenced. The correct answer is A. Define the EMS scope to encompass the primary manufacturing facility only, as it represents the majority of the company's environmental footprint, and the R&D lab's activities are considered minor. Explanation. The control framework reveals a common challenge in environmental compliance, accurately defining the scope of an environmental management system, EMS, in the face of evolving operational activities and regulatory expectations. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for comprehensive coverage with the practicalities of implementation and resource allocation. A poorly defined scope can lead to significant compliance gaps, missed opportunities for environmental improvement, and potential legal liabilities. Conversely, an overly broad scope can dilute focus and lead to inefficient use of resources. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it involves a systematic and documented process for scope definition that is directly aligned with the organization's environmental policy, significant environmental aspects, and legal obligations. This aligns with the principles of ISO 14001, which emphasizes that the scope should be clearly defined and documented, considering external and internal issues, requirements of interested parties, and the organization's activities, products, and services. A robust scope definition ensures that the EMS effectively addresses the most critical environmental impacts and risks, facilitating continuous improvement and demonstrating due diligence to regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach that fails to consider significant environmental aspects is professionally unacceptable because it directly contravenes the fundamental purpose of an EMS, which is to manage and reduce environmental impacts. This failure represents a significant regulatory oversight, as it means that key areas of potential noncompliance or environmental harm are not being systematically addressed. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of commitment to environmental protection and responsible corporate citizenship. Another incorrect approach that excludes a newly acquired facility without a formal assessment of its environmental aspects and impacts is also professionally unacceptable. This omission creates a compliance gap and a potential legal liability for the organization. It violates the principle of comprehensive environmental management and demonstrates a reactive rather than proactive approach to compliance. Ethically, it suggests a disregard for the environmental performance of all operational units under the organization's control. A third incorrect approach that relies solely on historical operational data without considering future planned changes or potential regulatory shifts is professionally unsound. Environmental compliance is dynamic. Failing to anticipate future operational changes or emerging regulatory requirements means the EMS will quickly become outdated and ineffective. This represents a failure in strategic environmental planning and a potential for future noncompliance, which is both a regulatory and ethical failing. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of the organization's environmental policy, a comprehensive identification and evaluation of environmental aspects and impacts across all relevant activities, products, and services, and consideration of the requirements of interested parties. This process should be iterative and subject to management review to ensure the scope remains appropriate and effective. Documenting the rationale for scope decision and any subsequent changes is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and facilitating audits. Question 8. The assessment process reveals that a facility manufactures, processes, and otherwise uses several listed toxic chemicals under EPCRA Section 313. However, the Environmental Compliance Manager is considering submitting the Toxics Release Inventory (TRI) report based solely on the quantities of chemicals that have been explicitly documented as released into the environment through wastewater discharge or air emissions, neglecting to account for the total quantities manufactured, processed, or otherwise used. Which of the following approaches best aligns with EPCRA Section 313 reporting requirements? Option A. Assume that if a chemical is not explicitly categorized as a release in internal operational logs, it does not require TRI reporting, even if it is a listed toxic chemical. Option B. Rely on historical TRI reports for the past 3 years to determine current reporting obligations, assuming usage patterns have not significantly changed. Option C. Submit the TRI report focusing only on chemicals with documented releases, as this represents the direct environmental impact. Option D. Report all listed toxic chemicals that meet or exceed the reporting thresholds based on the total amount manufactured, processed, or otherwise used, and then report the amounts released, transferred, recycled, or treated. The correct answer is D. Report all listed toxic chemicals that meet or exceed the reporting thresholds based on the total amount manufactured, processed, or otherwise used, and then report the amounts released, transferred, recycled, or treated. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for environmental compliance managers, balancing regulatory reporting obligations with the practicalities of data collection and dissemination. The professional challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying EPCRA Section 313, Toxics Release Inventory (TRI) reporting requirements, specifically concerning the threshold for reporting releases and other activities of listed toxic chemicals. A key aspect is understanding that the reporting threshold is based on the total amount of a chemical manufactured, processed, or otherwise used, not just releases. Furthermore, the prompt requires understanding the nuances of otherwise used and the importance of maintaining accurate records to support reported data. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core of EPCRA Section 313 reporting, the threshold determination. By focusing on the total amount manufactured, processed, or otherwise used, it aligns with the statutory intent to inform the public about potential chemical hazards. This approach demonstrates a thorough understanding of the regulation's scope and purpose, ensuring compliance by accurately assessing the facility's activities against the reporting thresholds. It also emphasizes the importance of robust record keeping, which is fundamental to demonstrating compliance and defending against potential enforcement action. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on reported releases without considering the total quantity manufactured, processed, or otherwise used fails to meet the reporting threshold requirements of EPCRA Section 313. This is a direct regulatory failure, as the law mandates reporting based on the total activity, not just the end-stage releases. Ethically, this approach is problematic as it potentially withholds crucial information from the public about the full extent of a facility's handling of toxic chemicals. Another incorrect approach that relies on outdated or incomplete facility usage data is also a significant regulatory and ethical failure. EPCRA requires current and accurate reporting. Using outdated information can lead to underreporting or overreporting, both of which are non-compliant. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to uphold the transparency principles of EPCRA. A third incorrect approach that assumes a chemical is not reportable simply because it is not explicitly listed as a release in internal operational logs, without verifying its presence in the TRI list, and the total quantity handled is a critical oversight. This ignores the otherwise used provision and the comprehensive nature of TRI reporting. It represents a failure to conduct a complete and diligent assessment, potentially leading to non-compliance and a lack of transparency. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all listed toxic chemicals handled by the facility. This includes identifying all chemicals manufactured, processed, or otherwise used, and quantifying the total amount of each. This quantification must then be compared against the EPCRA Section 313 reporting thresholds. If a threshold is met or exceeded, the facility must then determine the amounts released, transferred, recycled, or treated. Maintaining detailed and accurate records throughout this process is paramount for demonstrating compliance and for future reporting cycles. When in doubt, consulting the EPA's guidance documents or seeking expert advice is a prudent step. Question 9. Which approach would be most effective for a certified environmental compliance manager to ensure full compliance with state and local environmental regulations when a new facility is being established in a region with a history of highly specific municipal environmental ordinances? Option A. Proactively engage with state environmental agencies and relevant local municipal departments to obtain copies of all applicable local environmental ordinances, permits, and any relevant guidance documents, and then integrate these requirements into the facility's environmental management plan. Option B. Rely on the facility's legal counsel to identify and interpret all state and local environmental regulations without direct engagement from the compliance manager. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of federal and state environmental regulations, assuming that local ordinances will be consistent with or less stringent than these higher-level requirements. Option D. Prioritize compliance with federal regulations and address any identified state or local issues only if enforcement actions are initiated by regulatory bodies. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of federal and state environmental regulations, assuming that local ordinances will be consistent with or less stringent than these higher-level requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge for environmental compliance managers, navigating the complex and often overlapping web of state and local regulations in addition to federal requirements. The professional challenge lies in accurately identifying, interpreting, and applying all applicable rules without creating undue burden or, conversely, falling out of compliance. The sheer volume and specificity of local ordinances, which can vary significantly even within a single state, demand meticulous attention to detail and a proactive approach to information gathering. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and comprehensive review of all relevant regulatory levels. By engaging with local authorities and consulting specific municipal codes, the compliance manager ensures that all state and local mandates are identified and integrated into the facility's environmental management system. This proactive engagement fosters a collaborative relationship with regulatory bodies, which can lead to clearer understanding and more efficient compliance. Ethically, this approach demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to fulfilling all legal obligations, thereby protecting the company from potential penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that relies solely on federal regulations or a general understanding of state laws would fail to address the specific requirements of local ordinances. This oversight could lead to violations of local environmental standards, resulting in fines, enforcement actions, and potential operational disruptions. Such an approach demonstrates a lack of thoroughness and a failure to exercise professional judgment in identifying all applicable legal obligations. Another incorrect approach, such as assuming that compliance with state regulations automatically satisfies all local requirements, is a dangerous assumption that ignores the distinct authority of municipalities to enact their own environmental protections. This can lead to significant compliance gaps and legal repercussions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the federal regulatory landscape, followed by a detailed examination of state-level environmental laws. Crucially, this must be supplemented by a dedicated effort to identify and understand all applicable local ordinances and permits within the facility's operational jurisdiction. This involves direct communication with local environmental agencies, reviewing municipal codes, and consulting with legal counsel specializing in local environmental law. A proactive, multi-layered approach ensures that all regulatory obligations are met, fostering a robust and defensible environmental compliance program. Question 10. The review process indicates that the proposed industrial facility's environmental impact assessment, IA, for a new discharge point into a local waterway relies on historical water quality data that may not fully reflect current conditions due to recent upstream development. The project proponent is eager to proceed with permitting to meet construction timelines. As the certified environmental compliance manager, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A suggests that the project proponent rely on general industry standards for water quality and discharge limits, assuming that these will be sufficient to meet regulatory requirements for the waterway. Option B recommend that the project proponent proceed with the permit application based on the existing EIA, and if the regulatory agency raises concerns about the data, then conduct additional monitoring at that time. Option C recommend delaying the permit application until updated, site-specific water quality monitoring data is collected and analyzed, and engage with the relevant environmental regulatory agency to discuss the data limitations and potential mitigation strategies. Option D advise the project proponent to proceed with the current EIA, emphasizing that historical data is often used in initial assessments, and that any future issues can be addressed through post-permit monitoring. The correct answer is C. Recommend delaying the permit application until updated, site-specific water quality monitoring data is collected and analyzed, and engage with the relevant environmental regulatory agency to discuss the data limitations and potential mitigation strategies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in environmental permitting, where a proposed project's potential impacts are not fully understood or are subject to evolving scientific understanding and regulatory interpretation. The challenge lies in balancing the need for project development with the imperative to protect environmental resources, especially when faced with incomplete data or conflicting expert opinions. A certified environmental compliance manager must exercise sound professional judgment, relying on established decision-making frameworks and regulatory guidance rather than succumbing to pressure or making assumptions. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, data-driven, and precautionary strategy. It prioritizes obtaining the most accurate and comprehensive environmental data available, engaging with regulatory agencies to clarify requirements and expectations, and conducting a thorough risk assessment. This approach aligns with the precautionary principle often embedded in environmental regulations, which dictates that where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage, lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures to prevent environmental degradation. It also reflects best professional practice by ensuring compliance with all applicable laws and regulations, fostering transparency with stakeholders, and minimizing potential future liabilities. This method demonstrates a commitment to robust environmental stewardship and responsible project management. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the project without further investigation or clarification from regulatory bodies is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a disregard for the potential for environmental harm and a failure to meet the due diligence required under environmental laws. This approach prioritizes expediency over environmental protection and could lead to noncompliance, fines, project delays, or even project cancellation if significant issues are discovered later. Assuming the existing data is sufficient without a critical review or seeking expert consultation is another failure. It represents a lack of professional skepticism and an abdication of the responsibility to ensure the accuracy and completeness of environmental assessments. This can lead to flawed decision-making, underestimation of risks, and ultimately, noncompliance. Relying solely on anecdotal evidence or industry best practices without verifying their applicability to the specific site and project context is also problematic. While industry practices can be informative, they do not replace the need for site-specific environmental assessments and adherence to regulatory requirements. This approach risks overlooking unique local environmental conditions or specific regulatory nuances, leading to potential noncompliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process when faced with environmental permitting challenges. This process typically involves 1. Information gathering. Collect all relevant existing data and identify information gaps. 2. Regulatory review. Thoroughly understand all applicable environmental laws, regulations, and permit requirements. 3. Expert consultation. Engage with internal or external environmental specialists, scientists, and legal counsel as needed. 4. Agency engagement. Proactively communicate with regulatory agencies to seek clarification, discuss concerns, and understand their expectations. 5. Risk assessment. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of potential environmental impacts, considering both direct and indirect effects. 6. Precautionary principle application. Where uncertainty exists regarding potential harm, implement measures to prevent or minimize that harm. 7. Documentation. Maintain detailed records of all data, analyses, communications, and decisions. 8. Adaptive management. Be prepared to adjust plans and mitigation strategies as new information becomes available or conditions change. Question 11. The analysis reveals that a manufacturing facility uses a chemical that was historically considered non-reportable under the toxic release inventory, TRI, due to its classification. However, recent advancements in chemical understanding and updated EPA guidance suggest this chemical, or its common byproducts, may now meet the criteria for TRI reporting. The Environmental Compliance Manager is tasked with determining the facility's TRI reporting obligations for this substance. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance and professional integrity? Option A. Focus solely on minimizing reporting requirements by only considering releases that are explicitly and undeniably documented as exceeding thresholds, without investigating potential indirect or fugitive releases. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the chemical's current regulatory status, its properties, its use within the facility, and all potential release pathways, consulting official EPA guidance documents and the Chemicals Safety Data Sheet, SDS, to determine if it or its byproducts are listed TRI chemicals and if reporting thresholds are met. Option C. Continue to classify the chemical as non-reportable based on the facility's historical understanding and previous reporting practices, as no direct directive has been received from the EPA to change its status. Option D. Assume that if the chemical itself is not explicitly listed on the TRI list, it is not reportable, regardless of potential byproducts or changes in chemical classification. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the chemical's current regulatory status, its properties, its use within the facility, and all potential release pathways, consulting official EPA guidance documents and the Chemicals Safety Data Sheet, SDS, to determine if it or its byproducts are listed TRI chemicals and if reporting thresholds are met. Explanation. The analysis reveals a common challenge in environmental compliance, accurately identifying and reporting releases under the Toxic Release Inventory, TRI program. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of regulatory definitions, facility operations, and the potential for indirect releases, all while maintaining data integrity and avoiding both underreporting and overreporting. The facility's reliance on a single, potentially outdated, interpretation of a chemical's classification and its release pathways presents a significant risk. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, evidence-based review of the chemical's properties, its use within the facility, and all potential release pathways, including fugitive emissions and waste streams. This aligns with the core principles of the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act (EPCRA) and the TRI reporting requirements, which mandate accurate and comprehensive reporting of releases of listed toxic chemicals. By consulting multiple sources, including the EPA's official guidance, Chemical Safety Data Sheets, SDS, and potentially engaging with technical experts, the Environmental Compliance Manager ensures that the reporting is compliant with current regulations and reflects the actual environmental impact. This proactive and diligent approach fosters transparency and builds trust with regulatory bodies and the public. An incorrect approach that relies solely on a historical understanding or a single, unverified source for chemical classification is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to underreporting of toxic releases, violating EPCRA intent to inform the public about chemical hazards. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to uphold the professional responsibility to accurately represent the facility's environmental performance. Another incorrect approach, which might involve assuming a chemical is not reportable without proper investigation, also constitutes a regulatory failure by neglecting the possibility that the chemical, or its byproducts, might be on the TRI list or meet reporting thresholds. This can result in non-compliance and potential penalties. Finally, an approach that focuses on minimizing reporting obligations without a sound regulatory basis is ethically questionable, as it prioritizes convenience or cost savings over accurate environmental disclosure. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, clearly define the scope of the reporting obligation. Second, gather all relevant data and documentation pertaining to the chemical and its use. Third, consult authoritative regulatory guidance and interpret the regulations in the context of the facility's specific operations. Fourth, seek expert advice if ambiguity exists. Finally, document the decision-making process thoroughly to demonstrate due diligence and ensure accountability. Question 12. Market research demonstrates that implementing a new, less resource-intensive method for treating a specific hazardous waste stream at a treatment, storage, and disposal facility, TSDF, could significantly reduce operational costs. As the Certified Environmental Compliance Manager, SECM, which approach best ensures adherence to the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA Subtitle C regulations for TSDF. Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed treatment method against all applicable RCRA Subtitle C requirements, including land disposal restrictions, LDR, and perform validation testing to confirm consistent compliance before implementation. Option B. Adopt the new treatment method based on its reported cost-effectiveness and the fact that similar facilities in the region have successfully integrated it into their operations. Option C. Proceed with the optimization, assuming that any deviations from current treatment standards will be minor and can be addressed through future process adjustments if regulatory concerns arise. Option D. Implement the new treatment method immediately to realize cost savings, and then conduct a compliance audit after the first quarter of operation to identify any potential issues. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed treatment method against all applicable RCRA Subtitle C requirements, including land disposal restrictions, LDR, and perform validation testing to confirm consistent compliance before implementation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Certified Environmental Compliance Managers, SECM, in the U.S., specifically concerning treatment, storage, and disposal facilities, TSDF, under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA. The core challenge lies in balancing operational efficiency and cost-effectiveness with the stringent, non-negotiable requirements of environmental regulations. A SECM must navigate the complexities of process optimization while ensuring absolute compliance with TSDF standards, which are designed to protect human health and the environment from hazardous waste. The pressure to reduce costs can create a temptation to cut corners or adopt approaches that, while seemingly efficient, may inadvertently lead to non-compliance or increased long-term environmental liability. Professional judgment is paramount in evaluating proposed optimizations to ensure they align with regulatory mandates and best environmental practices. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a thorough, data-driven evaluation of proposed process optimizations that prioritizes regulatory compliance and environmental protection. This involves a detailed review of the proposed changes against specific RCRA Subtitle C regulations governing TSDF, including those related to waste characterization, treatment standards, e.g., land disposal restrictions, LDRs, storage requirements, container management, tank systems, containment, and disposal methods. The process must include rigorous testing and validation to confirm that the optimized process consistently meets all applicable treatment standards and does not introduce new risks or circumvent existing safeguards. This approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the SECM primary responsibility, ensuring compliance with federal and state hazardous waste regulations. It is ethically sound as it prioritizes public health and environmental safety over short-term cost savings. Regulatory justification stems from RCRA cradle-to-grave management system, which mandates strict controls at every stage of hazardous waste handling, including treatment and disposal. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing optimizations based solely on perceived cost savings without a comprehensive regulatory review is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach ignores the fundamental principle that environmental regulations are not suggestions, but mandatory requirements. Risks violating RCRA by failing to meet treatment standards, improper storage, or inadequate disposal, leading to potential fines, legal action, and reputational damage. Adopting a wait-and-see approach, where optimizations are implemented and compliance is only checked after the fact, is another critical failure. This reactive stance is contrary to the proactive nature of environmental compliance. It violates the spirit and letter of RCRA, which requires facilities to operate in a manner that prevents pollution and environmental harm. Such an approach can lead to the discovery of noncompliance only after significant environmental damage has occurred or substantial regulatory violations have accumulated, making remediation and correction far more costly and complex. Relying on anecdotal evidence or the practices of other facilities without independent verification of their compliance status is also professionally unacceptable. While benchmarking can be useful, it is not a substitute for due diligence. Other facilities may be operating in violation of regulations, or their specific waste streams and operational contexts may differ significantly, rendering their practices irrelevant or even detrimental to one's own facility. This approach demonstrates a lack of independent critical thinking and a failure to uphold the SECM responsibility to ensure compliance specific to their own operations. Professional reasoning. When faced with proposals for process optimization at a TSDF, a SECM should employ a structured decision-making process. First, clearly define the scope of the proposed optimization and identify all potentially affected RCRA regulations. Second, conduct a thorough risk assessment, considering potential impacts on waste characterization, treatment efficacy, storage integrity, and disposal methods. Third, engage in rigorous data collection and analysis, including laboratory testing and pilot studies, to validate the proposed changes against established regulatory standards. Fourth, consult relevant regulatory guidance documents and, if necessary, seek clarification from regulatory agencies. Fifth, document all evaluations, decisions, and justifications meticulously. Finally, prioritize compliance and environmental protection, ensuring that any cost savings are a secondary outcome of a compliant and environmentally sound process, not the primary driver. Question 13. System analysis indicates that an environmental compliance audit is scheduled for a manufacturing facility. The audit team has limited time and resources. To ensure the audit is both effective and efficient, which of the following approaches to audit planning and preparation is most appropriate for a certified environmental compliance manager to adopt? Option A. Allocate audit resources based on the availability of easily accessible documentation, irrespective of the environmental significance of the area. Option B. Focus audit efforts primarily on operational areas where historical compliance records are consistently strong, assuming continued good performance. Option C. Prioritize audit activities based on a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies areas with the highest potential for environmental impact and noncompliance. Option D. Assign audit tasks based on the personal expertise and preferences of individual audit team members, without a formal risk evaluation. The correct answer is C. Prioritize audit activities based on a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies areas with the highest potential for environmental impact and noncompliance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in environmental compliance auditing, balancing the need for comprehensive data gathering with the practical constraints of time and resources. A certified environmental compliance manager must exercise sound professional judgment to prioritize audit activities effectively, ensuring that the most critical areas are thoroughly examined without becoming bogged down in less significant details. The pressure to deliver a timely and cost-effective audit while maintaining high standards of compliance assurance makes this a professionally demanding situation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a risk-based methodology. This means identifying and prioritizing audit areas based on their potential environmental impact, likelihood of noncompliance, and the severity of potential consequences, e.g., fines, reputational damage, harm to human health or the environment. This aligns with the principles of effective environmental management systems and regulatory expectations, which often emphasize a proactive, risk-informed approach to compliance. By focusing on high-risk areas, the audit is more likely to uncover significant compliance issues and provide actionable recommendations for improvement, thereby maximizing the value of the audit effort. This approach is ethically sound as it directs resources where they are most needed to protect the environment and ensure legal adherence. Incorrect approaches analysis, focusing solely on areas with the most readily available data, regardless of their environmental significance or compliance risk, is an incorrect approach. This can lead to a superficial audit that misses critical compliance gaps in high-risk areas. It represents a failure in professional judgment and potentially a breach of ethical duty to conduct a thorough and effective audit. Prioritizing areas based on the personal preferences or past experiences of the audit team without a systematic risk assessment is also incorrect. While experience is valuable, it should inform the risk assessment, not replace it. This approach lacks objectivity and may overlook emerging risks or areas of current concern. Ethically, it deviates from a systematic and defensible audit methodology. Allocating audit resources exclusively to areas that have historically shown good compliance records, assuming they will continue to do so, is a flawed strategy. Past performance is not a guarantee of future compliance. This approach fails to account for potential changes in operations, regulations, or unforeseen events that could lead to non-compliance. It is a failure to exercise due diligence and a potential ethical lapse in ensuring ongoing compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured, risk-based approach to audit planning. This involves 1. Understanding the organization's operation, environmental aspects, and applicable regulatory requirements. 2. Conducting a thorough risk assessment to identify potential environmental impacts and compliance liabilities. 3. Prioritizing audit areas based on the identified risks, considering likelihood and consequence. 4. Developing an audit plan that allocates resources proportionally to the identified risks. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment and audit plan as circumstances change. This systematic process ensures that audits are efficient, effective, and provide the greatest assurance of compliance and environmental protection. Question 14. During the evaluation of a manufacturing facility's hazardous waste management program, an environmental compliance auditor identifies several instances where waste containers are not clearly labeled with their contents and accumulation start dates. Some containers also show minor signs of corrosion. The auditor also notes that the facility's emergency response plan does not explicitly detail procedures for responding to a spill of a specific, less common chemical used in their process, although it does cover general spill response. Considering the potential for regulatory violations and environmental impact, which of the following approaches best represents a professional and effective audit strategy? Option A. Immediately escalate all container labeling and corrosion issues for formal noncompliance reporting, and conduct an in-depth review of the emergency response plan's chemical-specific protocols. Option B. Document the observed deviations in container labeling and corrosion as minor observations for the facility to address during their routine operational checks, and note the emergency response plan's lack of specific chemical detail as a recommendation for future improvement. Option C. Focus solely on the container labeling and corrosion issues, assuming that the emergency response plan, being generally comprehensive, is sufficient for regulatory compliance, and defer any review of its specific chemical protocols to a future audit. Option D. Prioritize the investigation of container labeling and corrosion issues based on the potential hazard of the waste and the severity of the corrosion, while simultaneously initiating a focused review of the emergency response plan's adequacy for the specific chemical spill scenario. The correct answer is A. Immediately escalate all container labeling and corrosion issues for formal noncompliance reporting, and conduct an in-depth review of the emergency response plan's chemical-specific protocols. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in environmental compliance auditing, balancing the need for thoroughness with the practical constraints of time and resources. The auditor must identify potential noncompliance without becoming bogged down in exhaustive, low-yield investigations. The professional challenge lies in discerning which deviations warrant deeper scrutiny and which can be addressed through less intensive follow-up, all while maintaining the integrity and credibility of the audit findings. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing findings based on their potential impact and likelihood of regulatory violation. This aligns with the principles of risk-based auditing, a cornerstone of effective environmental compliance management. By focusing on the most significant deviations first, the auditor ensures that critical compliance issues are identified and addressed promptly, thereby minimizing the risk of penalties, environmental damage, and reputational harm. This approach is ethically sound as it directs resources efficiently to where they are most needed to protect the environment and ensure legal adherence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach fails by treating all deviations equally, regardless of their potential severity or likelihood of being a regulatory violation. This can lead to an inefficient allocation of audit resources, potentially causing critical issues to be overlooked, while less significant matters consume disproportionate attention. Ethically, this approach can be seen as a failure to exercise professional judgment and due care, as it does not prioritize the most impactful compliance risks. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss deviations that appear minor without further investigation. This can lead to overlooking systemic issues or leading indicators of more significant noncompliance. Regulatory frameworks often have thresholds for reporting and corrective action, and a failure to investigate seemingly minor deviations could result in a violation of these thresholds going unnoticed. This approach represents a failure in due diligence and a potential breach of professional responsibility to identify all material compliance gaps. A third incorrect approach involves making assumptions about the cause of deviations without sufficient evidence. Environmental regulations are specific, and assumptions can lead to mischaracterization of findings, incorrect recommendations, and potentially unfounded accusations of noncompliance. This undermines the objectivity and accuracy required of an environmental compliance audit and can damage relationships with the audited entity. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a risk-based approach to environmental compliance auditing. This involves 1. Understanding the relevant regulatory framework thoroughly. 2. Identifying potential areas of noncompliance based on the facility's operations and known regulatory requirements. 3. Assessing the likelihood and potential impact of each identified deviation. 4. Prioritizing investigations based on this risk assessment. And 5. Documenting all findings and the rationale for their prioritization. This systematic process ensures that audit resources are used effectively and that the most significant compliance risks are addressed. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that a company is planning to manufacture a chemical substance not currently listed on the TSCA chemical substance inventory for use in a new consumer product. What is the most appropriate regulatory compliance action to take under the U.S. framework? Option A. Assume the substance is exempt from notification requirements due to its intended use in a consumer product. Option B. Proceed with manufacturing and address any potential regulatory issues after the product is on the market. Option C. Submit a per-manufacture notification, PMN, to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, for review. Option D. Rely on the fact that a structurally similar chemical has previously undergone EPA review. The correct answer is C. Submit a per-manufacture notification, PMN, to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, for review. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in environmental compliance, determining the appropriate regulatory pathway for a new chemical substance intended for commercial use. The professional challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying the per-manufacture notification, PMN, requirements under the Toxic Substances Control Act, TSCA, to avoid significant legal and financial penalties, as well as potential environmental harm. Misinterpreting the scope of new chemical substance or the applicability of exemptions can lead to non-compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it demonstrates a thorough understanding of TSCA core principles and the specific obligations for new chemicals. By proactively identifying the substance as new and initiating the PMN process, the company adheres to the statutory requirement to provide the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, with sufficient information to assess potential risks before manufacturing or importing. This aligns with the ethical imperative to protect human health and the environment and avoids the severe consequences of noncompliance, such as fines, injunctions, and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that assumes the substance is already on the TSCA inventory without verification is a critical regulatory failure. The TSCA inventory is the definitive list of existing chemicals. Any substance not listed is considered new and subject to PMN requirements unless an exemption applies. Failing to confirm inventory status is a direct violation of TSCA Section 5. Another incorrect approach, such as relying on a generic research and development exemption without confirming it meets the specific criteria outlined in TSCA regulations, e.g., limited quantities, controlled use, no commercial sale, is also a regulatory failure. These exemptions are narrowly defined and require careful documentation and adherence to specific conditions. Finally, assuming that a similar chemical's existing PMN automatically covers the new substance is a misunderstanding of TSCA's substance-specific review process. Each new chemical substance requires its own assessment, even if structurally similar to an existing one, unless specific provisions for significant new use rules or other exemptions are met. Professional reasoning in such situations requires a systematic approach. First, definitively determine if the chemical substance is new by checking the TSCA inventory. Second, if it is new, identify all potential TSCA exemptions that might apply and rigorously assess whether the intended use and handling meet the exemption's strict criteria. Third, if no exemption applies, initiate the PMN process by preparing and submitting the required documentation to the EPA. This structured decision-making process ensures compliance, minimizes risk, and upholds professional responsibility. Question 16. The control framework reveals that a nation is preparing its national inventory report under the Kyoto Protocol. The environmental compliance manager must select a methodology for estimating greenhouse gas emissions from industrial processes. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the protocol's requirements and best practices for ensuring accurate and defensible reporting? Option A. Relying on historical emissions data from previous reporting periods, assuming current processes have not significantly changed. Option B. Utilizing a simplified estimation method based on readily available industry data, prioritizing speed and cost-effectiveness in report generation. Option C. Applying a proprietary emissions estimation software developed internally, without external validation or adherence to established international guidelines. Option D. Employing the most recent IPCC guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories, ensuring that the chosen methodologies are appropriate for the specific industrial sectors and that data sources are well documented and transparent. The correct answer is D. Employing the most recent IPCC guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories, ensuring that the chosen methodologies are appropriate for the specific industrial sectors and that data sources are well documented and transparent. Explanation. The control framework reveals a common challenge for environmental compliance managers, balancing the strategic objectives of international climate agreements with the practical realities of operational implementation and reporting. The Kyoto Protocol, while a landmark agreement, presents complexities in its reporting requirements and the need for robust methodologies to track emissions. A professionally challenging aspect is ensuring that the chosen approach to emissions accounting is not only compliant with the protocol's guidelines, but also defensible, transparent, and contributes to genuine emissions reductions. This requires a deep understanding of both the scientific basis of emissions measurement and the legalistic nuances of international environmental law. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the use of established, scientifically validated methodologies and adheres strictly to the reporting guidelines mandated by the Kyoto Protocol. This ensures data integrity, facilitates accurate national inventory reporting, and supports the credibility of the country's commitments. By focusing on the specific requirements of the protocol and utilizing recognized IPCC guidelines, the compliance manager demonstrates a commitment to accuracy and transparency, which are foundational ethical and regulatory principles in environmental management. This proactive and methodologically sound approach minimizes the risk of non-compliance and enhances the organization's reputation. An incorrect approach that relies on estimations without clear justification or a basis in accepted methodologies represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It undermines the integrity of emissions reporting, potentially leading to misrepresentation of actual emissions and a failure to meet Kyoto Protocol obligations. Ethically, it breaches the principle of transparency and accountability. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes cost-saving over methodological rigor fails to recognize that compliance with international environmental agreements is not merely a financial consideration, but a legal and ethical imperative. The failure to invest in appropriate tools and expertise for accurate emissions accounting can lead to substantial penalties and reputational damage. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of the specific requirements of the relevant international agreement, in this case, the Kyoto Protocol and its associated reporting guidelines. This should be followed by an assessment of available methodologies, prioritizing those that are scientifically sound, widely accepted, and explicitly endorsed by the governing bodies of the agreement. A risk-based approach is crucial, identifying potential areas of non-compliance and implementing robust controls to mitigate those risks. Continuous professional development in climate change accounting and reporting is also essential to stay abreast of evolving best practices and regulatory updates. Question 17. Regulatory review indicates that a manufacturing facility operates in two adjacent states, State A and State B. Both states have specific regulations concerning wastewater discharge limits, but State A's limits are significantly more stringent than State B's. The facility's discharge point is located in State B, but a portion of the manufacturing process that contributes to the wastewater occurs in State A. Facility is currently designed to meet the discharge limits of State B. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure full environmental compliance? Option A. Continue to meet the discharge limits of State B, as the discharge point is located in State B, and State A's regulations are not directly applicable to the discharge location. Option B. Seek to negotiate a compromise between the discharge limits of State A and State B, applying an averaged limit to the facility's wastewater. Option C. Apply the discharge limits of State B to all wastewater, as it is the less stringent requirement and therefore represents a more cost-effective compliance strategy. Option D. Implement wastewater treatment processes that meet the stricter discharge limits of State A for the entire facility's wastewater, as this will ensure compliance with both states' regulations. The correct answer is D. Implement wastewater treatment processes that meet the stricter discharge limits of State A for the entire facility's wastewater, as this will ensure compliance with both states' regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for environmental compliance managers, navigating the complexities of overlapping and sometimes conflicting state-specific environmental regulations when a facility operates across multiple jurisdictions. The core difficulty lies in ensuring compliance with the most stringent requirements while avoiding unnecessary or duplicative efforts, all within the framework of federal law. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing the most protective state regulation. This aligns with the fundamental principle of environmental law that compliance with stricter state standards generally satisfies federal requirements. Ethically, it ensures the highest level of environmental protection, which is the ultimate goal of compliance management. This approach also reflects a proactive and thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape, minimizing the risk of noncompliance and associated penalties. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on federal regulations, ignoring state-specific nuances, is a significant regulatory failure. Federal regulations often set a baseline, and states are empowered to enact more stringent rules. Failing to acknowledge and adhere to these stricter state requirements would lead to noncompliance with state law, potentially resulting in fines, enforcement actions, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that attempts to average or find a middle ground between state regulations is also professionally unacceptable. Environmental regulations are not typically subject to compromise or averaging. Each state's regulations are legally binding within its borders, and a facility must meet the requirements of each jurisdiction in which it operates. This approach demonstrates a misunderstanding of regulatory authority and enforcement. Finally, an approach that applies the regulations of only one state to the entire facility, regardless of where operations occur, is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. This ignores the territorial nature of environmental laws and the distinct regulatory authority of each state. It would lead to non-compliance in the states whose regulations are not being followed, exposing the company to significant legal and financial risks. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a systematic review of all applicable federal, state, and local environmental laws and regulations for each facility location. This includes identifying any specific state requirements that are more stringent than federal mandates. When multiple states are involved, a comparative analysis of these state-specific regulations is crucial to determine the most protective standard for each environmental aspect. Documentation of this analysis and the chosen compliance strategy is essential for demonstrating due diligence and for future reference. Question 18. Market research demonstrates that implementing lean manufacturing principles can significantly reduce operational costs. As a certified environmental compliance manager, you are tasked with evaluating how to integrate these principles into your facility's processes while ensuring absolute adherence to all applicable environmental regulations. Which approach best balances cost optimization with environmental compliance? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of all current environmental permits and regulations applicable to the facility's operations. Subsequently, identify lean manufacturing opportunities that align with or enhance compliance, and pilot these changes with rigorous monitoring. Option B. Adopt lean manufacturing practices commonly used in similar industries without a specific review of the facility's unique regulatory obligations. Option C. Prioritize the implementation of lean manufacturing techniques that offer the most immediate cost savings, assuming that existing compliance measures will remain sufficient. Option D. Focus on optimizing processes for cost reduction and address any potential environmental compliance issues only if they arise during or after implementation. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of all current environmental permits and regulations applicable to the facility's operations. Subsequently, identify lean manufacturing opportunities that align with or enhance compliance, and pilot these changes with rigorous monitoring. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with stringent environmental compliance, particularly when faced with evolving regulatory landscapes and the potential for significant financial penalties. The certified environmental compliance manager must exercise careful judgment to ensure that process optimization efforts do not inadvertently lead to non-compliance or create new environmental risks. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, data-driven assessment of existing processes against current regulatory requirements before implementing any changes. This proactive stance ensures that optimization efforts are aligned with legal obligations, minimizing the risk of violations and associated liabilities. It demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and a robust environmental management system, which are foundational to effective environmental compliance. Adhering to the principles of continuous improvement while maintaining compliance is a core ethical and professional responsibility. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a comprehensive regulatory review is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for legal obligations, potentially leading to violations of environmental laws and regulations. Such an approach prioritizes short-term financial gains over long-term environmental stewardship and legal adherence, creating significant reputational and financial risks for the organization. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or industry best practices without verifying their applicability to the specific site's regulatory context is also professionally flawed. This overlooks the unique compliance obligations that may apply, potentially leading to unintended environmental impacts or non-compliance with site-specific permits and regulations. It fails to demonstrate the required level of professional diligence and risk assessment. A third incorrect approach that relies on the assumption that past compliance guarantees future compliance is a dangerous oversight. Environmental regulations are dynamic, and changes can occur without immediate notice. Failing to conduct regular, up-to-date regulatory reviews before implementing process changes is a dereliction of duty and can lead to significant compliance gaps. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Understand the current regulatory framework applicable to the organization's operations. 2. Conduct a comprehensive audit of existing processes to identify areas for potential optimization. 3. Evaluate each proposed optimization against current environmental regulations, permits, and internal policies. 4. Prioritize changes that enhance both efficiency and compliance, or at least do not compromise compliance. 5. Implement changes with robust monitoring and verification mechanisms to ensure ongoing adherence to environmental standards. 6. Maintain a continuous feedback loop for regulatory updates and process performance. Question 19. The performance metrics show an increasing trend in minor oil spills at a coastal terminal over the past 2 quarters, with several near misses also reported. As the Certified Environmental Compliance Manager, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action to address this trend and ensure compliance with relevant environmental regulations? Option A. Initiate a comprehensive root cause analysis of all reported spills and near misses, involving operational staff and relevant technical experts, to identify systemic issues and develop targeted preventative measures, while also preparing for proactive engagement with regulatory authorities regarding the trend. Option B. Immediately implement a temporary, facility-wide shutdown of all transfer operations until a thorough, independent external audit can be completed to identify all potential risks. Option C. Focus resources solely on enhancing the spill response capabilities and equipment at the terminal to ensure rapid containment and cleanup of any future incidents. Option D. Review the reporting procedures for minor spills and near misses to determine if they are overly sensitive, potentially leading to an inflated perception of risk, and adjust them accordingly. Correct answer is A. Initiate a comprehensive root cause analysis of all reported spills and near misses, involving operational staff and relevant technical experts, to identify systemic issues and develop targeted preventative measures, while also preparing for proactive engagement with regulatory authorities regarding the trend. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate operational needs with long-term environmental stewardship and regulatory compliance. The Certified Environmental Compliance Manager must interpret performance data, identify potential risks, and propose solutions that are both effective and legally sound, all while considering the perspectives of various stakeholders. The pressure to maintain operational efficiency can sometimes conflict with the resources and time needed for robust environmental protection measures. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive, data-driven, and collaborative strategy. By focusing on root cause analysis of the spill incidents and engaging with operational teams and regulatory bodies, the manager demonstrates a commitment to preventing future occurrences, which aligns with the core objectives of environmental compliance and responsible corporate citizenship. This approach fosters a culture of continuous improvement and ensures that corrective actions are sustainable and address the underlying issues, rather than just the symptoms. It also demonstrates adherence to the principles of due diligence and risk management expected under environmental regulations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cleanup without investigating the root cause is professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the systemic issues that led to the spills, increasing the likelihood of recurrence and potentially leading to further environmental damage and regulatory penalties. It also suggests a reactive rather than proactive stance, which is contrary to best practices in environmental management. Another incorrect approach that involves withholding or downplaying the performance data from regulatory agencies is a severe ethical and legal failure. This constitutes a breach of trust, potential violation of reporting requirements, and could lead to significant fines, legal action, and reputational damage. It undermines the transparency essential for effective environmental regulation and enforcement. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the regulatory requirements and the specific environmental risks associated with their operations. This involves collecting and analyzing relevant data, identifying potential noncompliance issues or areas for improvement, and then developing a range of potential solutions. Each solution should be evaluated against regulatory compliance, cost-effectiveness, operational feasibility, and potential environmental impact. Stakeholder engagement, including communication with operational teams, management, and regulatory authorities, is crucial throughout this process to ensure buy-in and effective implementation. A commitment to continuous monitoring and adaptive management is also essential to ensure long-term environmental performance. Question 20. Implementation of the Emergency Planning and Community Right No Act EPCRA reporting requirements for a manufacturing facility involves managing a diverse range of chemicals. The facility's environmental compliance manager is tasked with ensuring accurate and timely submission of Tier Roman II and Toxics Release Inventory (TRI) reports. Considering the facility's recent expansion and introduction of new chemical processes, which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with EPCRA regulations? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of current chemical inventories against EPCRA reporting thresholds, establish a dedicated internal team for data compilation and verification, and submit reports well in advance of the statutory deadlines. Option B. Rely on the previous year's submitted reports as a baseline, making only minor adjustments for any significant, obvious changes in chemical usage. Option C. Prioritize reporting only those chemicals that have historically been flagged as high risk, deferring reporting for less frequently used or lower volume chemicals until closer to the deadline. Option D. Assume that any chemical present on site, regardless of quantity, must be reported to ensure maximum transparency with the community. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of current chemical inventories against EPCRA reporting thresholds, establish a dedicated internal team for data compilation and verification, and submit reports well in advance of the statutory deadlines. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in environmental compliance, balancing the need for timely and accurate reporting with the complexities of data collection and internal communication. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that all required information is gathered, verified, and submitted within statutory deadlines, while also maintaining transparency and fostering a culture of compliance. Misinterpreting reporting thresholds or failing to establish robust internal data management processes can lead to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. The Certified Environmental Compliance Manager must exercise careful judgment to navigate these operational hurdles. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and systematic process. It begins with a thorough understanding of the specific reporting requirements under the relevant U.S. federal regulations, such as the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act (EPCRA). This includes identifying all facilities and chemicals subject to reporting, understanding the reporting thresholds, and establishing clear internal procedures for data collection and verification. A designated team or individual should be responsible for compiling the necessary information, ensuring its accuracy, and submitting it to the appropriate state and local authorities by the statutory deadlines. This approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing regulatory adherence, accuracy, and timely communication, thereby mitigating risks of noncompliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on historical reporting data without re-evaluating current inventory levels. This fails to account for changes in chemical usage or storage, potentially leading to underreporting or overreporting, both of which can trigger regulatory scrutiny and penalties. Ethically, it represents a lack of due diligence. Another incorrect approach is to assume that if a chemical is present on site, it automatically requires reporting, regardless of whether it meets the established thresholds. This leads to unnecessary reporting burdens and can dilute the effectiveness of the reporting system by overwhelming authorities with non-critical data. This approach demonstrates a misunderstanding of the regulatory intent and can be seen as an inefficient use of resources. A third incorrect approach is to delay reporting until the last possible moment, hoping that minor data discrepancies will resolve themselves. This creates a high risk of missing the reporting deadline due to unforeseen issues, such as IT problems or staff availability. It also suggests a reactive rather than proactive compliance strategy, which is a failure in professional risk management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to community right-to-know reporting. This involves 1. Understanding the specific regulations, e.g., EPCRA sections 311, 312, 313, and their applicability to the facility's operations. 2. Establishing clear internal protocols for tracking chemical inventories, including quantity stored and used. 3. Regularly reviewing and updating these protocols to reflect changes in operations or chemical usage. 4. Designating clear responsibilities for data collection, verification, and submission. 5. Implementing a robust data management system to ensure accuracy and accessibility of information. 6. setting internal deadlines well in advance of the regulatory due dates to allow for review and submission. 7. Maintaining open communication channels with relevant regulatory agencies and local emergency planning committees.